Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel, The Inked Reader. Today I am wrapping up the books for the month of June that I have read. This was the shelf that came out and I am pretty pleased that I've read the majority of those, although I didn't manage to go through them all. It was a very busy month and I am surprised I ended up reading 10 things. So without further ado, we're gonna go from my least enjoyable read to the most enjoyable one, and as always a fair warning saying that this is based on pure enjoyment rather than quality, objective quality. So the only one that I didn't even start and I just couldn't get around to was The Curse of Saints. This is the Fairy Loot edition that came in, so this was the adult book box for May. And I am sorry, I just didn't manage to get into this one at all. A new release and I've not heard people speaking about these, so I'm gonna put this back on my shelves for now and read it eventually. But yeah, a bummer, I couldn't get hold of it. All the rest that it was in my TBR but it's not featured in these, it means I'm in the middle of. Okay, so I'm gonna start at number 10. I'm gonna give you like a one-sentence synopsis. I'm gonna go into more details usually of my synopsis when I do my TBRs. So number 10, I've got the only audiobook I've listened to last month, and this was Fledgling by Butler. I finally got around to try her writing because I had never before, and I heard amazing things about her writing, and I do want to say that her writing wasn't the issue here. It's not the reason why this is at 10th place. This is the story of this vampire that is actually in the body of a young girl, although vampire age differently, so she's around 53 human years, but in the vampire world she's still a child, she is still maturing. She wakes up in the middle of nowhere, she doesn't have any memories about what happened to her, she just knows that she is injured and her injuries are pretty severe, and so she has to survive in the wild for a while before she reaches like a highway, and then finally a human stops and helps her out, and she tries now to put together her memories, who she is, how she came to be that injured, who attacked her, what is their family, and so on. This is a standalone sci-fi fantasy. She's a vampire, they're called a different thing in the book, in us, but they are vampires basically. They pretty much have the same or some of the major characteristics as vampire. So I do consider this a vampire book, however this was very much a sci-fi take on it, which first of all it's not my thing. As someone who loves vampire in a horror or fantasy, they are some of my favorite creatures ever. The sci-fi take on it, although I do find that some of the topics of these and some of the way these vampires were made by Butler were pretty clever, they lost appeal to me. When you make it very scientific and less mythological and less full of lore, when you take away the mystic element and you put it in a very scientific way, I struggle with it more and I don't like it. However, there was like something that would make me never like this book, and it's the fact that this is a child. And yes, I've heard debates, I've heard reviews of people saying, but well, technically she is not a child in human years, she is 53 or whatever. She is a child for vampires, and that's all it matters. Like in her society, she's considered a child. She has the body of a child, and this child has sexual relationships with adult human men, with women, middle-aged women, and so on. A lot of the book is focused on her having these bonds and this relationship with these humans that are adults, and she's in the body of a child, and there was just no way for me to put aside preconception or just say, oh, but yeah, no, she's not actually a child, she is actually indeed like an adult just in the body of a child. She's still a child, she has a body of a child. For her culture, she's a child. It was kind of like a Lolita, but for vampires, and I couldn't stand Lolita and I couldn't stand these. Definitely a no-go for me. On top of that, I found this quite boring. It was very based on the sexual nature of these vampires, on these bonds, so many explanations about the bonds and all the rules of the bonds, very little action. Part of this is based on a trial, and yeah, definitely not my thing. I give it 2 stars, probably. No, I'm not saying that we'll never check out Butler's other works. I'm curious about some of the other stuff. However, do warn me if they have children having sex with adults, because then I'm not gonna go there. And I don't like when it's normalized, when it's like, oh, but there are good justifications. No, no, no. She's a child in her culture. She's in the body of a child. I don't care about anything else. Okay. At number 9, I've got Born Wicked. This is a beginning of a trilogy. It's a witch story. In this world, witches are not accepted, so they have to hide, and in particular you follow your main protagonists. You got one point of view, but she has two sisters, and they are all witches, and they need to hide from the Brotherhood because otherwise they will be put in exile or put in a mental health institution and taken away if they are ever discovered as being witches. At the same time, though, they're very powerful, and so it's hard for them to hide their powers. Okay, so it's a YA, and I knew that it was a long stretch for me to try this out, and yeah, it felt very flat. However, this also reminded me that thus far I really struggled with any witch book, and I don't know if I'm getting in the wrong ones. I've tried the adult ones, especially when I was younger, and I really enjoyed a few series that were urban fantasy. But every fantasy, only fantasy, not urban fantasy that has to do with witches, it kind of felt flat. This didn't necessarily have anything particularly wrong with it. It didn't do anything particularly bad, but it didn't do anything particularly well or new. It felt something I've read a million times before. And so that is why I just give it to probably 2.75 stars, something like that. I also think that part of the reason why maybe, you know, this is suffering from being a YA is because the world is not very much fleshed out, the characters are delved into but not really deeply, and that is okay. However, I've read amazing YA, so I don't want to say that, oh, because it's a YA these things are not done well, because I do believe that YA can do these things well. So yeah, it was unremarkable, and that is why it's in 9th place. I'm gonna get rid of it and I will not continue on with the series. Then at number 8, I've got No Longer Human. This is translated from the Japanese, based loosely on the true story of the author. So it's semi-biographical by the author, and I had read previously, or yeah, read No Longer Human, this one by Junji Ito. This is the manga adaptation of the book, and I absolutely loved. This is it's my favorite Ito thus far I've ever read. So I was generally curious about picking up the novel, and unfortunately I have to report that the novel wasn't nearly as good as the manga. And I think part of it's because of the writing style. It's very jumbled, it's jumping, it's written in a way that really didn't click with me. It's just a style that felt like it wasn't fully developed as a novel, and that is okay. It's a style that many people love. I personally found it jarring in this case. It's just that the manga explored this exactly same sad story, which is this man playing the clown all his life, trying to fit in, because in reality he doesn't feel human. He doesn't feel like he can relate to anybody. He doesn't feel emotions as other people do, so he needs to be liked by others in order to give himself value, and he becomes obsessed with it, and then his relationships become so shallow, empty, and the more those are empty, the more empty he feels. I found the author biography when I went to Wikipedia and just researched him and read a couple of articles actually so tragic but so fascinating. And yes, the book starts to explore that a bit and how that came about, but I found the whole thing just very tragic and sad overall, the fate of the author after these. I must say that I do honestly believe, though, that a lot of people might relate to this book, and you know how this is a struggle of accept that you will never be feeling that way. You know, the kind of struggle of really trying to fit in when the reality is that you probably never will, because the problem is internal, is not external. The problem was within the protagonist. You know, it's the acceptance that you will never feel. Probably you will never feel as other people you think they feel. And again, there is a lot to unpack in you think they feel. And you know, it's accepting that you are different, that you can't fit in, and there is that acceptance that is ultimately impossible and then leads to the end. And so it is like, I don't know, it's a twisted story, and it's deeply though relatable for some people, because I have met people like that. I know people like that, and I think somehow we all understand a bit the part of feeling different, of feeling like something is wrong with us, or that there is something wrong with us for which we can't relate to others. However, you know, there are people that feel this way more profoundly and way more deeply, and to, you know, bigger extents than some of us do, and so I can only understand to a certain degree because I don't have that kind of lived experience of feeling this way. But it is that kind of human torment that in reality many people have. It's a very difficult topic for me to explain and to delve into, and I don't want to spend too much time here, but I did get the conflict. I did understand where the author was going with these, and the impossibility of being human and not feeling like one. And yeah, it is just something that I do generally I'm glad that I've read. However, I think the manga does an amazing job of translating these into a visual, entertaining, horror-ish way. I'm gonna keep it, but it wasn't structured, it wasn't written in a way that I appreciated. If you have to choose, I would just still go with the manga. I think it gives you the same exact vibes, the same exact inner conflict and the inner horror that this person is exploring, just better. And that is my opinion personally. Then I've got Crazy Rich Asians. This shelf behind me was a bit more packed with romance than any of my other shelves are. I don't really read romance, but this is something that I always wanted to watch the movie. Just I thought it was going to be like a very entertaining, very required no thoughts movie, and I had acquired the book in a charity shop, and so I wanted to give it a try. Now this book has to be grateful that I do love family sagas. Family sagas are some of the books that I started to read from my grandma's house when I was around 14, and I started just, you know, delving into family sagas, and so I love them as a genre, and the fact that this is mostly a family saga rather than just a romance helped me pump up the rating a bit, or helped me not putting this down and not opening it again because I was tempted a couple of times. Generally, if I don't hear a brand name mentioning a book ever again, I'll be happy. And very briefly, this is about Rachel, who has been in a relationship with Nick now for around a year. She has never met his family though, and all of a sudden he decides to take her to Singapore, where a friend of his is having a big wedding and she will get to meet his family. Turns out they are crazy. I think crazy is the first thing they are. Outwardly rich. But honestly, do people like this exist in real life? Where they don't have a personality, they just have bank accounts with a lot of zeros in it? Because there was a part of me that found this extremely silly. Like, I do not want to believe that the people in these could be real humans, because they were just brand names. They were just, you know, shopping in Paris and just flashing their money and their wealth in a way that also made them petty, but to a point where there was nothing else apart from pettiness. And so, yeah, that didn't click with me that well. I really also have to comment that this is categorized as a romance when you look it up, and I was like, where is the romance? Like, Rachel and Nick are supposed to be so in love, but you barely see each other interact with each other. You know that they've been together for a year, but there are very little scenes with them together. Most of the times they are separated. You follow all the other characters as well in this family, and I do believe the Astrid story, for example, for me was more interesting than Rachel and Nick to a certain degree. But it is crazy. It's full of stuff happening. It is pretty fast-paced, so it really kept me entertained for what it was. Will I ever pick up the sequel? I don't know. If I find it in a charity shop, I might. I'm not gonna buy or like spend more than £1 on it. I'll be really honest. And I didn't love his writing particularly or anything, but I will watch a movie because I do think that these might translate in a very funny, entertaining movie. Will I keep these? I honestly generally have no idea. For now, probably, and then I will see in a few months' time how I feel, if I would just want to donate it back. But yeah, I've read it. Then I have got the Merciless by Danielle Vega. This is a horror YA, which was like, usually I tend to reach for adults horror, but I had these on my shelves for a long while, so I wanted to try. And it is about this girl that become convinced that a girl in their community is possessed by the devil, and so they try an exorcism. Just gonna leave it at that. Very vague. But to be fair, this is what this book is about. Excuse me when I gag, because this was gory. Like, this was way more gory than I would ever expect for a YA, and that is a point that goes toward this book. I liked how it was brutally violent, how it was disgusting in parts. I've never watched the movie The Exorcist because I don't watch horror movies. Sorry, I know it's a sacrilege for someone who loves horror books, but visually I really struggle, and some of the scenes in these I could really picture them in my mind. So probably wouldn't watch these, I'll be really honest. I'm okay with reading it, I enjoyed fairly enough, but I would not want to watch stuff like that. It's too gory, it's too human torture for me. And it was entertaining. Listen, it is a very simple, bare story. The characters are not very much explored. They are just there to be tortured, massacred, to make you hate them, and to make you be like, oh, okay, like that. So these are the only scope that these characters have. It's pure fun and entertainment. I've read it fairly quickly. I do want to know though, are the sequels as good or better than these? Because I might check out the audiobook. I don't know if I need to physically spend a lot of money on them. It didn't blow my mind or anything. I just found it was entertaining for what it was. So let me know about the sequels if you read them. I'm curious, because this does finish in a way that it makes me think like, oh, more horrible stuff are about to happen, and I do want to potentially check it out. It's something that I kind of forgot because I read it toward the beginning of the month and then forgot about it, and then toward the end I reminded a couple of scenes were like, oh yeah, that was actually pretty good. So overall, it was a good experience. And then I've got In the Lives of Puppets. This was the Fairloot edition. This is the adult book from Fairloot for the month of May. And I did do a full unboxing. This is a retelling of Pinocchio, but with a sci-fi twist. It's a very loose retelling, and you follow Victor, who lives with his father in the middle of the woods. No one is around, and he just has companion robots as friends. One day they found a new robot that they bring home to try and save, and he's quite aggressive. He doesn't really like humans. He's actually programmed to kill humans. But then Victor, with his big heart, he tries to really kind of befriend him, and something happens to the dad, and they need to leave the safety of the woods to go and try and save Victor's death. I can count on the fingers of one hand how many authors I would read if they were ever to put out a Pinocchio retelling. And honestly, I just need one hand. And TJ Klune is one of them. If any other author, which I either didn't know or didn't love to bits, was to write a Pinocchio retelling, I would never pick it up. I don't like Pinocchio. It's one of my least favorite Disney movies. I do not like the story. I do not care for the story. And I don't particularly love to beat sci-fi. So it was a bad combination, okay? Only TJ Klune can make me still enjoy overall the book, and that is exclusively because of the side characters and how hilarious certain scenes were. I loved Nurse Ratched and Rambo. They were the highlight of this book. And also at the end, it was very touching. And I didn't care much about Victor, and the whole plot I didn't care much at all. I generally just enjoy the process of me consuming his writing. He is such a good author. He puts very important, touching messages together with a lot of humor in his books usually. To these days, well, this is my least favorite by him, and I generally think it's just because of the retelling side of it, the plot that I don't care about, and the sci-fi elements that unfortunately are not my cup of tea. But if you like Pinocchio, if you like sci-fi, and if you love TJ Klune, you don't want to miss this one. And it was fairly quick to read just because of how easy is his writing, and I do want to support the author a lot. Least favorite by him thus far that I've read, but still overall a very good quality book. Then I've got Now I Rise. I did read the sequel to And I Darken. This is a historical fiction which is categorized as YA. However, I would also say that it's okay for adults as well. And it is a retelling of the story of Vlad Tepes without vampires. It's exclusively historical fiction. There are no fantasy elements in this book. But you follow the son and the daughter of Vlad Tepes. I really loved the first book. So this time I appreciated Radu's point of view and traveling somewhere because the war is brimming, and I don't want to spoil anything. So the fact that he has traveled now and he's in this city doing what he has to do, that part was very fascinating because it's also historical. a period of time where I know very little about, and I am now learning while, you know, reading a fictional book, but at the same time there are some elements of truth to it, and I really appreciated his point of view. Lada's point of view was very lacking up until the very end, and in the very end, very few last scenes we get of Lada is what made me pump up to 4 stars. That is the Lada I knew. This was the Lada I was waiting for, and I do understand that there was a build up to that point, which made that point probably more powerful, because she had been a bit meek, Vasa, in a sense, and so that was very, very good. But what I ultimately love about this book is the exploration of the siblings' relationship, their inner conflict. They are in very difficult situations, and they are very different human beings. They do have this bond, they don't know how to navigate though, and so it is the characterization that keeps me glued to the pages. And yeah, I will definitely finish this series. I still recommend it. No, I didn't love this as much as I loved the first one, which was completely a novelty. However, I can see the potential for the end, and while it felt a bit more dragging at times while reading it, ultimately when I sat back and look at how much I enjoyed this, I did quite enjoy the sequel as well. The 3 that are left, I've enjoyed them quite equally, but I did put them in order of what stayed with me. So take this with a pinch of salt. I enjoyed them very much for different reasons. Number one is that because it was the only book that made me cry in the whole year, so that is why it's number 1. But at number 3 I've got The Boy, the Mole, the Fox and the Horse. This is a middle grade book, the only middle grade I've read thus far, and it's full of drawings and some quotes by the author. I categorize this as a fantasy when I did my stats, but in reality the only reason why this was a fantasy is because there are animals talking. But it really is like a book to read to your child, and look at some of the amazing illustration that he has, that and includes very powerful messages that all kids can understand and that all kids should listen to. And I do generally want to print some of his pages, and I will reread these a million times. I want to read these with my child. I'm just gonna make a lot of use out of these. It doesn't matter what age you are, there are stuff in it that we all need to hear now and then. And number 2 is a book that I featured. I spoke about this in the mid-year freakout tag I've done. I'm gonna pop it down below for you guys, but this is Rebecca Ross' Divine Rivals, and this was the Fairy Loot. Now I'm so confused.
A few moments later.
This was the YA May Fairy Loot book, and the Saints one, so this one, and this one was the adult one. So these two came within the May boxes. So I attempted to read in June, failed, succeeded, and this is the story of Iris and Roman. They are rivals at the journal that they work at, and they are competing to get the columnist position. And Iris has a very difficult family situation where her mother is mostly drunk every night, and her brother now has left to go to war. And in this world there are a few gods that are not the gods we know of. So although the theme of this was Greek, ancient Greek, the gods are not the Greek gods. There are new gods, we never heard of them. Two of them are at war with each other, and their war is fought by 2 human sections. So these humans are at war with each other on behalf of the gods, and her brother leaves to go to war for one of the 2 gods. And he has now gone missing, so she is trying to achieve a position of, you know, a columnist. She's trying to deal with her mother, bring home some money, and at the same time she's very worried about her brother. She has an old typewriter that her grandmother has gifted her, so she starts sending letters to her brother by just putting them in the closet, but they disappear. And one time she gets a note back from the closet. So this, first of all, feels very historical fiction. I've read World War II fiction before, historical fiction. This felt so similar to that. So he had a definitely historical fiction vibe, very realistic in a sense, and the fantasy element is almost like a low fantasy where it becomes a bit more intense toward the end. It is the beginning of a trilogy, or at least a duology, so there is definitely another book of his coming out. But it doesn't really feel fantasy. It doesn't really have that kind of vibe. But what I really generally loved about this one was how romantic it was. And for someone who likes mayhem and horror and violence and tragedy, I was genuinely surprised of how much I enjoyed the romance that there is in this book, and how touching there was, how genuine it felt. The only trope that maybe you can find in this is miscommunication, which I do find annoying, but only to a certain degree. However, the way it was done, it didn't bother me, just because on the other side we had such a refreshing, intense, but so sweet romance between those two characters. I was rooting for them so much. This book it made me happy, and I felt like butterflies in my stomach in some of the scenes between each other, and I was generally surprised how much I loved this, considering again I don't really do romance. And also our main protagonist, often she has to fend off for herself, and it was so well written. I do need to check out more about her. I think she has potential of becoming, you know, a very dear writer for me. I will continue on this for sure, and it is just refreshing for the genre. The characters are 18, 19 years old, so they're very toward the end of their teens, so it didn't feel YA at all. It felt very adult, very historical fiction romance with a very powerful World War II vibe to it, in a sense. Generally impressed by these, and I gave it 4.5 stars, I think, something like that. It ends with Us, Colleen Hoover. This is officially the only book in the year that did get me teary. I did actually generally cry a bit. Not much, couple of tears, but it was the only book that managed this year. I would categorize this as a literature fiction. People said it's a romance, and that to certain degrees it is, but not for what you think it is. I don't know, I don't want to spoil anything, but basically you follow this girl. She has just lost her father at the beginning of a novel, so she's on a rooftop just trying to digest what happened at the funeral, and she meets this neurosurgeon that is living in the same building where she is at the top of. And they just have a weird conversation, as two strangers have, and they are generally attracted to each other, and then they just go separate ways because it's not ready for a relationship, and she doesn't like one night stands. So they just leave, but then fate puts them together again. And you see her navigating with new relationship and her memories for her first relationship and her first love. Some chapters are in an epistolary form where she writes to Ellen DeGeneres, who in her imagination was the person she was sending these letters to when she was in love for the first time, and just recounting what she was living through and her first love, because Lily, our main protagonist, she came from an abusive household where her father was abusive to her mother. Now, I understand why a lot of people say this is not a romance, this is a literature fiction depicting abuse, and with a very powerful ending. And the reason why I cried, it wasn't from the very end, it was from the scene at the hospital. I'm just gonna say that, and you know, if you read this book, you know what I mean. And I think this book clicked particularly with me because I used to in the past work as a domestic violence advisor, so domestic violence was my bread and butter for around 2 years. And I did a series on my channel where I was reading memoir of domestic violence at the time, and it just was something that it consumed my life. And between lived experiences of my own as a child and, you know, my job then when I was an adult, this book was kind of made for me, in a sense. I also loved the afterword that the author puts in. This is semi-autobiographical in the childhood side, where the author herself, her mother, was victim of domestic abuse by her father, so Colleen Hoover's father. He was violent toward her mother, and then she took some inspiration from some of the scenes that she had seen as a child when she was telling about the abuse. So there was that aspect of it, and I loved how in the afterword she generally says, this is just one experience, I do not mean to represent domestic violence in general, every situation is unique, this is just what I've witnessed. And also she recognized that her character had financial means which many victims do not have, so her character could make different choices throughout this book because of her financial means. And the fact that the author acknowledges this and acknowledges how many women or men that have been abused are not in the same situation, it was very important for me. And because I would have criticized that otherwise, but she addresses it in a way that I found very genuine and very honest and open. She wanted to pass along a message which I found extremely powerful, and that's why I loved the meaning behind the title, and I love that scene at the hospital. I had shivers. I generally was shivering, and I wished they'd do a movie, because I think so many more people will watch the movie and get the message through. I love the character of Atlas, and Ryle, I must say that she could have done Ryle character in a way that we would just have hated him and not want to have anything to do with him, and instead the way she does him, where he generally has a lot of good qualities, makes it so much harder for us to digest this story, but also it makes it so much more real. You know, people have different sides to them, and some of both sides will be positive, however they're not gonna make up for the rest. And so the exploration of the characters, how she does them, I think that was quite clever. Now I don't want to spoil anything, so I'm just gonna leave it vague, but the author at one point, one character says that you can give your child food when they are 4 months old. No, you can't. You can't even give them water. Like, read the science. Like, babies can't digest water properly until they're 6 months old. Imagine food. Don't give your baby food at 4 months old. I found that was not well researched at all. Like, it's actually potentially dangerous. So, no food or water to babies until they're 6 months. Please. Apart from that, I love the book and I give it 5 stars. Is it perfect? No, but my 5 stars, I've done a video where I explain how I rate books. My 5 stars are the books that make me feel a lot of emotions. And this one did. I had shivers at the end. Am I interested in the sequel? Only to certain degrees. I do generally want to see what happens, because I do cherish a couple of the characters in it, but I will purchase it, I will read it, but I think this one is what did the majority of things that could do for me. Does it make sense? But if you've read the sequel, let me know. Is it as good? That is it, guys. Let me know what was your favorite book of the month. If you're new, I would love for you to subscribe. Button is down below. I wouldn't mind. I hope you take care of yourself, and I'll see you next time. Ciao!